Hello and thank you for tuning into Cozy Time Sound Story Edition. Before we begin our story, let's take a moment to settle in. Take a few deep breaths and allow your mind and body to settle into a state of peace and contentment. With each breath, allow yourself to become more and more contained in your own inner space. Notice your breath as you exhale. Feel the tension in your body and mind melting away. Take a few seconds to draw attention to each part of your body. Release any areas of tension as you consciously relax your muscles. Feel the stress of your day evaporating. Feel yourself sinking into a state of ease and relaxation. Let go of any unnecessary thoughts and feelings that arise and just focus on your breath. As you find yourself sinking into a mindful moment, be gentle with yourself and allow yourself to know that all is well. Tonight's tale is a retelling of the old classic, The Tale of Briar, better known as Sleeping Beauty, rewritten by me. Once upon a time, a king and queen ruled a faraway land where fairies and magical creatures lived. The people of this land were so in awe of the magical creatures that they held them in high regard and allowed them to wander freely. The king and queen were wealthy. They had plenty of fine clothing, good food and drink, and a magic carpet to take them wherever they wanted. They lived in a fabulously grand castle and ruled with fairness and justice, never taking advantage of their people or showing any sort of ill will. Despite being married for many years, they had no children, which caused them deep sorrow. With each passing year, this sorrow only seemed to get more intense. One day, as the queen was out walking by the lake in her beautiful garden, she noticed a tiny fish on the shore, gasping and almost lifeless. As the queen knelt down and peered closer, she could tell the poor fish was in dire straits and needed help. She carefully picked it up and took it to the lake's edge, where she then carried it to deeper water. The queen, feeling pity for the small fish, gently placed it back in the water and watched it swim away to safety. Before it swam away, the fish raised its head and said, "I am aware of your wish, and as a reward for your kindness, you shall soon have a daughter." In that moment, the queen felt a mixture of joy and compassion, knowing that her wish was going to be granted. She could imagine her future daughter growing up with a kind heart and innocent mind, sharing her feelings, her thoughts, and dreams. She slowly walked back to the palace, her heart overflowing with hope and gratitude. Though the years grew longer and hope began to waver, the king and queen never wavered in their faith. Ever since the wise fish made its prophecy, they had faithfully been waiting for its fruition. The whole kingdom held its breath in anticipation. Then one day, the predicted moment arrived. The king and queen were overjoyed beyond measure, and the whole kingdom celebrated. Joyous music filled the air, flags flew high, and the people rejoiced. The king's court hugged each other in joy, and the great hall was soon filled with the cheering and singing of the people. To celebrate their joy, and to share their daughter's beauty and spirit with everyone, the king declared a great feast and invited everyone he could think of. From the royal chambers, he invited all of the great figures of the kingdom. From the large town nearby, he invited the humble folk, the traders, merchants, and craftsmen. He even invited all of the town's bunnies and cats to celebrate his daughter's birth. The queen wanted the fairies present, so they could bestow their good wishes upon their little girl. In the kingdom, 13 fairies had to be invited, but the king and queen only had 12 golden dishes. As a result, one of them was not invited. The 12 fairies arrived, each wearing a high red cap, red shoes with high heels, and holding a long white wand. The feast had been prepared to great extravagance, with the royal chefs preparing the most exquisite dishes for the guests. There were towering sugary desserts, golden brown cups of savory soup, and heaping platters of tender, juicy meat. Everywhere, guests were filled with the joy of the celebration. After the wonderful feast, the fairies formed a circle, and each bestowed a wish upon the young princess. One by one, each fairy bestowed upon her a special wish. They gave her a lifetime of goodness and a heart of gold. They made sure she had an inner beauty that shone brighter than the stars. They blessed her with wealth beyond measure and a lively mind full of hope and creativity. As soon as 11 of them had done blessing her, a great disturbance was heard from the courtyard, and it was announced that the 13th fairy had arrived, with a black cap atop her head, black shoes on her feet, and a broomstick in her hand. She then entered the dining hall, and not having been invited to the feast, was very angry, scolding the king and queen, and setting out to take her revenge. She then proclaimed that the king's daughter shall, in her 15th year, be wounded by a spindle and fall down dead. At that point, the last of the friendly fairies, who had yet to give a gift, stepped forward and said that the curse must be fulfilled, but that she could lessen its severity. So her gift was that the king's daughter, when the spindle wounded her, should not actually perish, but would instead fall asleep for 100 years. The king, desperate to protect his beloved daughter, commanded that all the spindles in the kingdom were to be bought and destroyed. He ordered that all merchants no longer supply them. He further decreed that no one should offer a spindle to any other person, nor attempt to use one in any capacity. He frantically hoped that by his command no spindle could be brought into the kingdom, and that by his watchful eye the princess would never fall victim to the 13th fairy's evil fate. To everyone's joy, the first 11 fairies' gifts were granted, for the princess was so beautiful, kind, wise, and well-mannered. On the day of her 15th birthday, the king and queen were away, leaving her to explore the palace alone. She eventually came upon an old tower with a small staircase leading to a door which had a golden key in it. She carefully inserted the key, giving it a twist to unlock the door. The door creaked open and she stepped inside the mysterious room that lay behind it. She was filled with curiosity as her eyes adjusted to the dim light to reveal an old lady spinning. The princess asked what she was doing, to which the old lady replied, "Spinning." The princess had been entranced by the sight of the spindle, a gleaming gold contraption she had never seen before, and it captivated her. In a moment of curiosity, she grabbed the spindle and began to spin it in her hands. Little did the princess know, but this was a fateful move, for it was the same spindle that had been foretold of by the fairy long ago, and the prophecy was now coming true. That fateful spindle pricked her finger, and she was thrown into a deep sleep, her body lifeless and still. She was not dead, but had only fallen into a deep slumber. The curse of the wicked fairy had been cast, and soon it seemed the entire kingdom had succumbed to the same mysterious fate, with nothing but an eerie silence pervading the air. The king and queen, who had just come home from a long journey, succumbed to the same sleep. Even the horses in the stables, the dogs in the court, the pigeons on the housetop, and the flies on the walls all seemed to have taken a nap, snoozing peacefully in the midst of the strange stillness. Even the crackling fire on the hearth had stopped its merry dancing and dozed off. The cook, who had been pulling the kitchen boy by the hair to give him a box on the ear for something he had done wrong, let him go, and both of them fell asleep. The butler, who had been slyly tasting the ale, fell asleep with the jug still at his lips. Everything had stopped and was soundly asleep. Soon, a large hedge of thorns grew around the old palace, its height and thickness increasing every year until nothing could be seen from the outside. Not even the roof and chimneys were visible. A report of the beautiful sleeping Rose, as the king's daughter was called, spread throughout the land. Everyone wanted to see her, so they came from far and wide and tried to breach the thicket that surrounded the palace. However, none of them ever succeeded, as the thorns and bushes would grab them and hold them fast, leading to their unfortunate demise. Anything that tried to make it across would quickly be snared in the brambles and thorns, and were unable to break free. After many years, a son of a king arrived in that land. An old man told him the story of the thicket of thorns and the beautiful palace behind it, and of the sleeping princess named Rose and her court. He added that his grandfather had said many princes had attempted to breach the thicket, but had instead met their fate not by the tender mercies of those inside the thicket, but by their own foolishness in attempted such a dreadfully perilous task. The young prince declared that he would not be scared, and he decided to see Rose. The old man tried to stop him, but he was determined to go. Shaking with trepidation, the young prince set off on his journey. He knew that he was unwise to go, for deep within he was very scared. He eventually came upon the beautiful castle surrounded by giant thorns. He trembled with fear at the thought of meeting Rose, but his curiosity pushed him forward. That very day, the 100 years were over when the prince came upon the thicket, which now only had beautiful flowering shrubs. After he passed through, the shrubs closed in behind him. Finally, he reached the palace, and in the court, the dogs were asleep, the horses were in the stables, and the pigeons were on the roof, all sleeping with their heads beneath their wings. Nervously, he stepped into the castle, heart in his throat. The flies were resting on the walls, the butler had a jug of ale at his lips, and the maid had a fowl in her lap, and the cook in the kitchen was about to hit a boy with her hand. He went through the empty halls of the castle with nothing but silence as his companion. His footsteps echoing against the empty walls stirred a strange curiosity in him. As he progressed further, he began to feel the weight of the castle's secrets bearing down on his fragile shoulders. But despite this, he could not help but be entranced by its majestic beauty. The atmosphere was so still that he could feel each breath he took, like a whisper in the night air. He found himself almost mesmerized with wonder at the thought of the princess of his dreams, a prospect that seemed almost too good to be true. Who was she, and where was she hiding? His heart was pounding in anticipation as he explored the castle further in search of his fairy tale princess. Eventually, he arrived at the old tower and went into the small room where Rose lay asleep on the couch near the window. She lay there against the light of the setting sun, her long hair and her face alight with a gentle glow. He was immediately captivated by her beauty and knew he had to do something. Without a word, he leaned down and softly pressed his lips against her. It felt like time stopped and all the troubles of the world were far away. Nothing else existed except for that one lingering moment, full of warmth and tenderness. He felt a spark of electricity shooting through his body, and knew that he had never experienced something so incredible before. He slowly pulled away, his heart filled with an emotion he had never felt before. She was so stunning that he couldn't take his eyes off her, yet he couldn't express what he was really feeling at that moment. He stepped back and smiled. He hadn't expected what happened next. Suddenly, Rose awoke, and her eyes sparkled like stars, and a smile beamed across her face. As they embraced, he felt something he hadn't felt before, a spark of magic. It was a feeling of contentment and joy. They both knew that at this moment, this embrace was something special, something that would bind them together forever. The king and queen awoke with astonishment at the activity around them. The horses were shaking themselves, the dogs were jumping and barking, the pigeons flying about, the flies buzzing, and the fire in the kitchen flaring up. The jack and spit were still spinning, the butler had finished his ale, the male was still plucking a fowl, and the cook was scolding a young boy. Everyone's eyes were wide with surprise, and the king and queen could not believe what was happening. They looked around the room, amazed at how alive everything had suddenly become. The prince knew from the moment he'd seen Rose that she was the one he'd been searching for. Everything about her only served to make his love for her even stronger. He wished to marry her, and Rose accepted him. The prince and Rose were then married and celebrated with a wedding feast. The guests from both the human and fairy world joined together in the festivities, with wonderful feasting, dancing, and singing. Even the 12 good fairies attended, having had their gifts and goodliness returned by Rose's kiss. They cheered on the happy couple, and the prince and Rose were truly content. They lived happily together for the rest of their lives. They raised a wonderful family, and the prince and Rose were often seen walking arm in arm in the beautiful lands of the kingdom. Love and joy were always in abundance, and they were never far from each other throughout the remainder of their days.